Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. Today, I'm delighted to introduce highly esteemed astrologers, authors, and lecturers, Tara and Aswin. So thank you so much for joining us today, and how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here and have some moon talk.
Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. Today's episode, we're talking about progressed moon phases, and you've put together a beautiful presentation, so let's dive in.
It's funny, I was in preparation for this, as life happens sometimes, I was searching for something in my little den nook, and I found this big, huge write-up I had done back in 2020 on moon phases and moon stuff. So it's like it popped right into my hands. And one of the things I have written at the top is an Alan Oken quote, which is, "Moon in astrology is like the queen is to chess, the game."
That's such a beautiful quote, and I love it. Even if you're talking about from mundane to horary to electional, medical, the moon is so important in astrology.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's like it's the heart of where things are at, right? And if you're not in tune with that, I think it's pretty hard to navigate any of the other places. So there's a reason why we say, keep your moon happy, or feed your moon, or love your moon, and all these things, because it really does make a difference. I know, Ashwin, whenever we talk about moon phases, and I think it always helps us to first talk about the moon a little bit. And I love hearing what Ashwin has to say. Actually, we can just say, like, when Ashwin and I first met, he actually found me through some different connections, and we started having these sort of Eastern versus Western, and I'm rooted in evolutionary astrology, right? And he's much more Indian traditional. So talking just about what the moon is can be an interesting point from those different perspectives. And one of the things that I have on here, right, is the moon, along with Mercury, rules the brain, right? And our neurological connections, right? Whether that's in the brain or the stomach, right? And these days we talk about brain being in the stomach just as much as, up in the head. I feel like mine lives down there most of the time with all my tummy things. But when you say moon is mind, Ashwin, can you tell us more what you mean by that, and where that kind of comes from, the Indian side of things?
So the first thing, you quoted Alan Oken, which is great, but I want to quote us. And we start the book by saying that we all live two lives simultaneously, one which is very, very internal, and the other is our relationship with the external world. So our relationship with the external world is largely determined by our relationship with our own inner self, which is the moon, the most personal thing. So 2nd century astrologer, the Greco-Egyptian astrologer Vettius Valens, says that the corruption of moon is the corruption of everything. So it's a very dogmatic take, but I really agree with that, because the moon is responsible for our mind, that is the emotional mind. So the differentiation in Jyotish is, or the Indian astrology is, Mercury is the rational or logical mind, which helps in reasoning, while the moon is the emotional mind, which helps us to run towards our wants.
Yeah.
So I love that explanation, that distinction. Wonderful.
So we need to kind of clearly differentiate between the wants and the needs. So the needs more or less kind of is ruled by Mercury, but the wants, it doesn't know whether it is really necessary at this point. But we all want something, and no matter what the situation is, we go for it. And to kind of, suppress ourselves to bring us out of that desire to kind of run for the want, we need to have this need, so the need to kind of have this relationship between our own self and the external world. And it really begins with Mercury, because Mercury is the first planet after the luminaries. So there is this intricate connection that moon has with all the planets, which kind of, although all the planets have an internal sense or representation of who we are, but I think moon is the most personal, and we can easily relate the moon with our personal being or the inner self more than the other planets. So, and we started, our first idea was to title the book as Releasing the Moon, which is basically release the moon from each planet, that is starting from a conjunction, and then just ask the moon to walk through the zodiac signs, and basically divide it into 8 phases, as Dane Rudyard very famously wrote in his Synodic Cycles. So that is where the foundation of our work lies, which is very, very fundamental to the understanding of the flavors or the colors of the moon as it traverses through the zodiac.
And then, of course, today, we were just going to talk about the Soli-Lunar phases, right? The sun-moon phases. But though the foundation of that applies to any phasal relationship between any two bodies, right? So once you get that sort of foundation, you can extrapolate that all the way out. And one of the things that I was thinking about is, like in life, when, I don't know, a couple's having relationship problems, right? And we right away sort of try to dissect the problems. I was thinking about, but have we actually stopped to understand who's in the relationship first, like the actual players that are in it? And when we think about moon phases, that's just partly why we're having this conversation now about the moon, because you got to know, what does the moon want, right? Which is the word Aswin just used. And Aswin will always say the moon just wants what it wants. It doesn't care if it has to explain it or how it makes sense, right? And so this idea of getting to know the planets at that level, something else, I wonder what both of you guys think about this, but the moon is linked with common day people, right? I sometimes think of it as being the most human planet. It's very closely connected with like the vulnerable stages of life too, right? Whether that is like older people, younger people, like when we go through those different phases where, we kind of really come face to face with our mortality and our physicality. But it's interesting. I'm reading a book called The Planets Within by Thomas More, and it talks about Jupiter also being a common planet, which is interesting because Jupiter, we oftentimes think of being more, elevated royalty. But it is an interesting thing to think about that both Jupiter and Moon have a lot to do with society. I think Jupiter's a broader view, but Moon, if I don't have a good connection with myself, that's going to then bleed out and impact everything. I had in this big, like crazy write-up I have in my Terra fashion, I have this note down here that says that if you just work with the moon from a personality level, it's kind of dead. It's reworking old memories. Like it's always stuck in the past. So even when a new moment's happening, I'm reacting to some unconscious memory that pops up that links me in. But if I'm more conscious about my moon, that's where I actually can open up my heart and my emotional self to actually love and help and feed the world. And so I like the idea of thinking about the word dead. I'm sure wasn't mine. I'm sure it came from, some book or something I was reading. But that's one thing that can happen with the moon. We can be so stuck in the past, right? And again, the moon is linked with memory, but not the facts. It's linked with our emotional experience of what happened in the past. And that's a whole different creature, right? Which is why pretty much every day in our lives, we go through all kinds of weird moments wondering why we react and feel the way we do. It's because that moon, which is my other favorite word for moon, is safety, right? I think of moon as being, what's your okay measure in every moment? So like, as I'm moving through my day, am I okay now? Am I okay now? Is what Cal just said to me, do I feel okay, right? Is my chair comfortable? And so the speed of safety, and I don't just mean physical safety here, the speed of safety, I've heard it say it's faster than the speed of light or the speed of sound. How fast we will do something in our moon selves.
I love that explanation, and thinking of the moon like one of the fastest moving bodies. And we're talking here from the morning when you have your cup of tea to the afternoon. You can fluctuate. I certainly do. I mean, I have a Gemini, I have a mutable moon, Gemini moon. So I can literally from hour to hour just switch my moods depending on what's going on that day. But I love what you're saying about the safety and the comfort. And we explain it to students in that way. Where do you go when you're having a really bad day? Where's your sense of comfort? If you had a really stressful day and you're really pissed off, where do you go to find comfort? Do you go and read a book? Do you go take a nice long bath, like fixed water? Or do you, go and eat, have a nice meal? All those kind of dynamics. So I love what you're saying there, Tara. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's easy to miss it because it's so instinctual, right? So like those are just the things we naturally do. So sometimes it takes, at least for me, I have to kind of consciously tune into, okay, wait a second, what do I do when those things happen? Because again, the moon just happens. Like that's how it occurs to me. So you have this like little window. If you want to be more conscious with your moony part of yourself, you have such a small window to be aware of what's happening when it's happening. I mean, I'm thinking about like my partner and I, we rarely have fights. And usually when we fight, it's over nothing. That's the funny thing. We do great on the difficult stuff, but it's usually over something that we don't even remember what it was. But we had one this last weekend. And it always reminds me of how fast I can go from, and I have moon conjunct Mars, so I mean, it adds to it. But I can go from just being here to being way out here and not even really knowing where I am. And I attribute that to that I'm in the past somewhere. I don't realize it. I'm totally in the past, trying to relate it to the present. And Darren, my partner, is no longer even Darren. And I don't even know that I'm like, the Tara that's here. And that's how trippy the moon can be.
Do you have a fire moon?
Yeah, Leo.
Oh, is that right? I was going to say 0 to 60, boom.
Yeah. Yes, totally. And I'm Aries rising. So you can see, and actually Aswin and I, each of us has the moon conjunct another planet. We always tell like the students, like, wait and see if you can guess which one of us has which one. But it definitely adds to the fact that we would write a moon book, right? Like that's like for both of us, like that moon space or moon experience. But there's a mysterious side to it too. And this is the thing, like as much as we want to reason it out, I don't think we ever, I would say we don't get there with anything because that's the nature of life, but moon in particular, right? There's a part that is never going to be fully revealed. That's part of what's interesting about it or magical about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like this idea of okay meter because I think
okay meter, yeah.
I really like it because and that is the personal thing. So are we okay? Are we happy?
Yeah.
So I think that is where everything begins. And that basically defines our relationship with the external world.
Yep.
So,
yep. And then, yeah, so let's see what we have. Yeah, so then there's more moon. So we already talked a little bit about, some people eat to self-soothe. And actually, I would say moon in general, regardless of the sign, that's going to be something that appeals to the moon because moon wants to feel fed. Right. And so now some of us get fed by doing our art or by doing our work or by getting out in nature. But the idea of what feeds me to me is a very lunar concept. And so this is why feeding your moon, if you consciously do it, you're going to feel better because it's going to give you that stuff that you naturally want. To me, it's also linked with, well, we know like all cycles, all rhythms, all phases, all that stuff, because in some ways you can think, the moon every month, it has a rebirth every single month, right? That light comes back. And I always remind myself that the moon is sunlight. I know we call it moonlight, but it doesn't have its own light. So any of these things we're talking about, I know we're not focusing on the sun today, but all of this is about the sun because the moon doesn't have a reflection without it. And so I sometimes say, to myself, even like my moon is reflecting my sun, right? And to really feel into that space instead of looking at those as being separate things because they're really not.
I love how you've got the sleeping moon because I'm thinking of dreams. I love Demetra George when she's talking about moon finding its joy in the third house and dreams and sacred rites and divination, but certainly that dream component you mentioned before, like that memory, the unconscious and linking back to that. So I love your descriptions in here.
And also some people say that that our soul goes back to the moon between lives, right? And the moon then holds those past life memories. And whether that's a literal or metaphorical thing, like it just feels like, to me, like it resonates with me. Belonging is another part, right? The moon wants to belong. So, we say words like home and family, which are true, but to me, ultimately, it's, where is that sense of belonging for someone? I think in Dane Rudhyar's astrological triptych, the gift of the spirit to Cancer, right? The sign that's ruled by the moon, he says to know where one belongs, right? And so whatever that means to you, and I'm a Cancer, right? So whatever that means to you, when you find that, like that, there is real joy in that.
And I love that part you're saying there about moon domicile Cancer, that even that tribal feel, like where do you belong? Where's your tribe? Where do you go to find comfort? Who's your comrades and all those parts, your family, your friends? I love that. Yeah,
me too. And then of course, habits, we use the word habits a lot. So again, this is just like sort of watching what you do habitually. I sometimes, like with planets, I like to play around with just, can I spot them, right? So when is moon showing up in me? When is moon showing up in you? When is moon in this space? And so these are kind of some of the things that for me, when I'm looking to accuse me in, because we sometimes in astrology say you have to be a moon whisperer to be able to help or work with yourself or anyone else. And it's true, because if you're not let into the safety zone, there's going to be real limits to where you're going to be able to go. All right. So should we jump into like phases now? Do we feel like done enough moon?
Yeah, let's get into sun. After all, it was equinox yesterday. So
yeah, take it away, Aswin.
Oh, okay. So basically, cycles of the planets is like it always involves two planets, and we kind of measure the faster moving planets' relationship with the slower moving planets, and it's divided into 8 phases. So, but the reason why this is very important and it's brilliant because this, as much as we think this is a very modern technique or modern idea of understanding the planets, this has been a very, very primary concept since ancient or pre-ancient times. And this is extremely astronomical. So the revolutions of the planets were always measured with one fixed point. So it's either a fixed star or it is from a planet. So for phases, we always need a planet. And Day and Rudyard kind of popularized this idea of Soli-Lunar cycles, which makes a lot of sense because sun is the source of energy on Earth. At least from a, I mean, most of the Western astrologers use the tropical zodiac, and the relationship between the Earth and the sun is really important, and its foundation for the astrological analysis in terms of whatever we want to do. And then comes in the moon, which basically is called as the reflection of the sun. So what I always like to say is that you fix sun in one position, and the moment moon moves slowly from the sun, the flavor of the moon keeps changing, and it's a very, very observable phenomenon, and the color of the moon changes. Sometimes very largely, but sometimes subtly. And I think we believe that the color of the moon kind of indicates a lot of, the inner psychology of a person, not necessarily what happens in the world. Obviously, moon is the trigger point of anything that happens in the world. And Tara, you mentioned that moon is always associated with humans. In mundane astrology for the past 2000 years, moon is the significator of humans on Earth. So as and when moon, so one is dark moon. So sometimes we tend to assume or get into this stigma or dogmatic opinion that dark moon is bad. So let's not get into the qualitative aspect of which is good and which is bad, but everything is there for a reason. So let's not be very unidimensional. So that is the primary idea. Although I'm a traditional astrologer, I like to believe that planets always have multiple permutations and combinations of their manifestation. So a dark moon is basically like the birth of a baby. A baby is always there in the mother's arms or lap or heart or whatever it may be, and it doesn't see the light of the day as much. So and only when the moon keeps moving through the zodiac, it gains legs, it grows in light, and then the crescent moon and the first quarter, then the pre-gibbous, and then the culmination. So that is where like the reaping of benefits. And again, I just wrote in my today's newsletter talking about the lunar eclipse on March 25th. Like many astrologers have an opinion that, I'm not saying it's wrong, but many astrologers have an opinion that the moment moon has culminated at a point, there is no scope for much development or reaping benefits or something like that. But the real truth is that until then, we have not had much experiences. We have had only learnings. And the pinnacle of learning comes when moon culminates as it gets in the opposition to the sun. And then it keeps moving. And that's when we realize that our past is very important. So, and that's when we try to implement our learnings in order to kind of expand who we are. Not just learnings or something like that, but expand who we are as human beings. And that's where the moon's role from the new moon to full moon plays after the moon culminates. And we kind of tend to implement whatever lessons and experiences we had in terms of what we want to do ahead. And there is a point where the moon ages. So when the moon is like 270 degrees away from the sun, it's a maturity point. I won't call it as a saturation. Maybe it's saturation, but it is a point of maturity where you're talking with an 80-year-old. So imagine you're an astrologer. Like I met Bob Mulligan in India, and he had practiced astrology for almost 45 years then. So I was basically meeting I am this crescent moon who is willing to run, but I have a person who is just with me talking, and he has this. He is almost like like this 80-year-old man. I mean, not literally, but from the moon's perspective, the wealth of knowledge and knowledge in the sense not what we learn, but in terms of what life is, and the point of enlightenment, or a little before the enlightenment point. But that's not the case with the first quarter moon. So, and we tend to kind of look at all these experiences and try to have this various moments of self-reflection and then move forward, which is going to greatly help us in this balsamic phase, where our energy levels are very, very low. So,
yeah. I love what you were saying before, and just picking out the distinction between good and bad and using those terms. And for me, it's the distinction between skilled and unskilled. So, for example, if we had two people with a full moon phase, and again, skill versus unskilled, it's not good or bad. You might have someone who has that potent energy to go out and achieve, but conversely, you might have that energy that goes out in an unskilled way that becomes argumentative or destructive. So I love how you're bringing the distinction between it's not good or bad. We have to bring it down to whether it's skilled or unskilled. And it doesn't matter what phase we're talking about there. So I think that was wonderfully put.
Well, and that's good for everything, because this idea that, for example, that Pisces is more evolved than Aries because it's later in the wheel, for example, like, no, I mean that, and also cycles are always in other cycles and other cycles. So we're not in one place. I don't know. I just feel like that part always gets me crazy. When
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's always remind people, like, so this is one cycle, but it's in this and then in that, and then our brains will go crazy, so we can't handle it. Aswin, I love when so this is another thing that for me too, that full moon, people make it sound like it's the end. It's only halfway through. I mean, seriously, it's halfway through. Yes, there's a culmination, but I think that's an important piece. Before we jump to all the separate phases, I just want to mention that one of the reasons for me why I like working with phases so much is that it gives me sort of context for where we're at in a process. Meaning, I can look back and see, where did this particular thing I'm learning or growing through, where did it start? I can see where I'm at sort of in the overall process. And I can also sort of look at when it will probably wane and come towards an ending. So kind of knowing where things are at, it helps you know where you're at. And also, not everybody has aspects, right? But everybody has a phase between everything. So there's no like, like between your moon and Mars, you have a phase, right? And regardless of how you look at things. So I like this idea too. It's just more of like a bigger picture than, I feel like taking a moment in time, it's not that it's not useful, but without the context of where it came from, where it's going, it is very hard to understand what's going on. And Aswin, I think you talked about most of this stuff already. This is just talking about the phase relationship between things. And by the way, regardless of whichever two planets or bodies we're looking at, like this, the basic, again, the basic cycle and phase development are the same. And you can watch it in a garden. You can look at it in a human life from birth to death, right? You don't even really need astrology at all to understand phases. You can look at a project from beginning to its end. Right. So again, there's always a new beginning. There's always going to be a waxing or a growing. There's always going to be a fullness or a culmination, and then a decreasing period and an ending. Now, the thing we grow isn't always what we want. And that's how the things can look different, right? That's the thing. Like sometimes, when we talk more about the full phase, sometimes we recognize, ooh, that's not actually what, I wanted to do, which changes the trajectory of the rest of the cycle, but it's still the thing. It's out and it's visible.
That's such an important point, that it might not be what you want and what you've grown. So I love that.
Yeah. Well, it's a good reminder, because I know we always think, yeah, full phase, it's out there, celebrate whatever. And I'm like, yeah, a lot of the time that's true. But sometimes the celebration is more of just the awareness that, oop, going to make tweaks next time, and not going to keep on pushing the thing forward if it's not the thing that we want.
You might have done something naughty in the past and it all comes to light, and it's like, I didn't really want everyone to know that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Maybe I don't want to be the spotlight right now. So different approach. When Dane Ruggiero talks about the moon and the sun together, one of the things he emphasizes is how moon or sun is our sense of purpose, and moon is how we live it, right? And truly, like even when we look at the sun in the sky, you can't look at it directly without burning your retinas out. So there is like this spirit essence to sun, and moon is how we digest and actually then manifest and in many ways filter through into this planet, at least in a 3D way. So, but real simply putting it together, sun and moon, how you live your purpose, right? That's how those two pieces come together. And too much one without the other, right? Too much sun, we can't really implement, live it, and do it. It's sort of like when you have these awarenesses and you're like, oh my God, I'm looking at my chart and I understand all these things. And then the better question is, can you live any of it, But if you're too in the moon, right, then you may be too stuck in the body, too stuck in reactions, too stuck in 3D, and you don't have access then to that more spirit or inspiration. So it's both super important. This is just a brief little, we have slides with the individuals, but this is just a quick breakdown to look and see where things are at. Each of the 8 phases are 45 degrees of the 360-degree wheel. So that's how it breaks down. And so I think let's talk about them. Let's see if we are okay on time. I'm going to say this in advance. I was thinking about, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but it will make sense as we go through. I was thinking about first quarter and last quarter, right? So the waxing half moon and then the waning half moon. And I was thinking about first quarter to me is kind of when we get things out there. And last quarter is when we bring them home. And
right.
Yeah. And so that's a real simple way to sort of think about those two sides of it. And I was thinking of it again, Aswin, when you were talking about all the importance after the full moon. And this is where it is, like, that's where you have the opportunity to bring it home, whatever that thing is that's been out there. But what if you don't bring it home, right? So that's that, to your point, that's where I think the full isn't the culmination in that way. It's more the awareness of what's there.
Yeah, it's basically, I think you put it very brilliantly, because, and a lot of these things, we don't need to kind of go to the birth chart. We can just observe in transits. And observing the lunations every month is the most fundamental thing that every astrologer should do. But those who are learning astrology newly, I think it's very, very important to kind of follow the lunations every month. And on the other hand, to the point that you mentioned, I just lost the thought.
Well, as you think about it.
Okay. It's like Frodo Baggins kind of getting the ring from Bilbo, and then ultimately
I love that.
he kind of gets it, and he carries it, he loses it in between. Samwise Gamgee wants it, and then again he gets it and destroys it, and then goes back.
That's so good.
Brilliant.
So good. And right now, as we're doing this episode, we're gibbous moon. So when we get to that point, we can sort of just, if we, Aswin, to your point, like to actually feel into where we are right now. I mean, there is always some usefulness. I am such a like birth chart person. Aswin knows this is where we like complement each other pretty well. But I'm like, if you don't know the moon phase you were born under, I would say go figure that out now, because that's gonna
So let me get personal now here. So Tara, you said before, so your new moon energy, right? Did you say Cancer and then Leo moon?
Yeah.
And then so I'm curious, Aswin, how about yourself?
I have the sun in Sagittarius and moon in Taurus, so it's almost culminating.
Oh wow!
So you
not
are
necessarily culminating. I like to say it's yeah.
So it is gibbous then.
Yeah, it is gibbous. I like to say it's culminating, but in reality, it's not.
That's right, because it's not crossed the line yet, which means right now, today, we are in your personal lunation birthday.
Yeah. I love that.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's great.
And it speaks to the importance, Tara, to your point before. Even knowing a native's moon phase can give you so much information, just that alone, on how someone is. Like myself, I'm Aquarian sun, Gemini moon, so I'm in that waxing period. And usually when you speak to people, obviously you bring up the rising and other factors to bring in, but usually sometimes you can tell to a certain degree or feel that energy from
yes. Yeah. Yeah. You really
don't you think his sorry to interrupt, but don't you think his Aquarius sun and Gemini moon are very, very descriptive of what he's doing now?
Yeah. Always on.
The moment he started the conversation, I was thinking, I was talking to a different person. He's like a very, very seasoned anchor, and the Aquarius sun is kind of putting yourself out in the world, in the society. and the Gemini moon is just walking the, whatever you want to say.
Twin, I love that. That's the most eloquent statement I've heard about my own two lights. Thank you.
Yeah. I also can see, Cal, you watch, like the way you watch us when we're talking, has that Aquarian like view.
Yeah.
And I also suspect that you're not planning what you're going to say next. I think you're actually really paying attention to what's happening. Like I can just sort of feel that.
You guys blow my mind, and you're so spot on. And that's why I love doing episodes like this, Let's Talk Astrology, because it's seeing what happens. It's not scripted. It's natural conversation. Let's see what happens next and have that flow. But you guys blow my mind, spot on.
Well, you're just being you. So thanks for letting us see it. That's what I was saying. So one thing I do say as far as working with your birth, the phase you're born under, is for me, it helps me think that energy helps me meet my moment. So that's one way you can think about it. So we can use me, right? I'm new moon. So that's actually where we are here, right? With the first phase new moon, which has, and people have differing opinions. I'm just going to give you mine. It has Aries energy to it. So if that helps you think about, new moon phase carries a whole lot of Aries energy. And so if that is your birth moon phase, making the first move, going for it, right? Not trying to be too scripted, like being willing to try something without really knowing how it's going to turn out, that will serve you well. So I almost think like not in every single moment, right? Because some things require different things, but in most cases, like for me, if I just go with it, I do better than getting stuck in my head.
It almost has like an entrepreneurial quality to it, like maybe trying different things out. And I find a lot of people, natives with the new moon energy, they will try many different things and wear many different hats.
Absolutely. And you don't know. I mean, you don't have, so new moon, there's not much external light. So you really got to kind of look inside and feel where the fire is and see where you're going to go. And then you course correct. I always think the win for new moon, and I think Aries energy in general, is to try it. It's not the outcome, right? The win is that I went for it. And so that takes us then into crescent, right? Which now that sort of get it going. Now, all of a sudden, we got to find some foundation, right? We got to get some roots to it. One of my teachers, Laura Nalbandian, used to say that there's a lot of resistance in crescent phase because it's so easy to like fall back to what came before. It takes so much energy, I got to keep building the thing that you just like, you want to like dip back down into the old cycle, and you can kind of feel it. And so it has that Taurus flavor that takes the determination. Think about farming, for example, right? Or what it would take even just to grow a little plant in your house, like when it first gets going.
I love that explanation, almost trying to balance there between maybe trying to get back to old habits. So trying to go push forward. I love that description.
I think I really like the keyword called resistance. It's spot on because like the crescent moon is like, it doesn't know much, but it thinks that it knows so much. And then thinks it's so big, but there is a real big world out there, and it doesn't realize. But the realization comes slowly as it moves to become more individualized. Separating from the sun. I think resistance is really a good word. Like even as astrologers, like I had a very, very early moment with my family that I should shut up as an astrologer. But today I still shut up. I don't talk too much, like because I know what I don't know. To see some people kind of do magical things, it's like I feel so dead. But some younger astrologers on Twitter are kind of very, very descriptive of this this crescent moon or late new moon phase, where the resistance comes in. Like they're very, very energetic, and they've taken 2 or 3 courses from really good astrologers, and suddenly they have this the release from themselves that they want to kind of put themselves out and want to flush the knowledge out. And in the meantime, somewhere it's like, yeah, I know things, you need not teach me, kind of a thing. That I'm not saying this in a very negative way, but I think this youngsters kind of quality that comes in, we're all rebels when we are young. So I think that really comes out.
Well, and then at
they-
different points in our lives, we are too. I mean, take the Uranus opposition, right? I mean, a lot of us go back through those phases, but it makes me think like in the sky, if I'm starting to see a little more, it's almost like, oh, I can see it. I know what it is, right? Without waiting for the rest of it to be there. So I think that totally makes sense.
And you're
Which then
speaking to the reality there, Ashwin, I think as well, and that, not to denigrate people who jump out after a few astrology courses and go out there and put the name out there and try and build everything together. But sometimes there's that lack of deeper knowledge, maybe with what they're trying to share. And there's a limitation there, and sometimes it, especially in this day and age where we've got like the TikToks and the very bite-sized information, it can be quite superficial. So I like where you go, what you're saying about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think resistance is good in some ways, but also it's a limitation in many ways. So and as I mean, one very unique thing between like astrologers and other other vocations is that somehow astrologers realize that knowledge lies beyond Instagram reels. So obviously we can learn from, I'm not saying that, so I catch up Tara's Instagram reels almost regularly, and she does it at 3 a.m. Indian time, but still I try to catch up. I mean, not to complain, but the thing is like the learning that we get from that on a live session where you talk about some of the dynamics of evolutionary astrology. So that's very important. But I mean, where does she get that? That is from the texts and the experience of looking at hundreds and hundreds of charts. But as a 22, 23-year-old, you hardly have looked at charts. So, and that's where we need to kind of, it's very difficult for me to kind of have a dogmatic opinion on anything because of so much is still out there and we don't even know. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was just a very classical description of what a youngster or a young astrologer can be.
I love that.
I mean, we could do the same for some of the older ones and give an equally, challenging description. So I'm just saying there's always both sides, but I think in
that's
general,
the last quarter.
Yeah, we'll talk about them when we get there. Nice. But so when we get to first quarter, which typically we give it a feeling of Leo, and it's like taking the show on the road phase, right? This is where when I learned it, my teacher called this crisis in action, right? Because you're like, I'm going for it, right? I'm getting out there. And then oftentimes the results are not exactly what you want them to be, but that's important. So you can then adjust the quote unquote show, whatever that may be. So this idea of testing things out, but results oftentimes kind of come back really quick. There's a lot of energy in this first quarter phase, right? It's a lot of like, I mean, it's it's halfway full, right? So it's wanting to be all the way there, but it's not there yet. It's not yet to gibbous, which is where we're going to make more refinements and adjustments, which Aswin can personally talk about. So there can be, I think this is true with the whole first half of the cycle. We didn't talk about this, but the first half of the cycle is aligned with more subjective awareness, right? And then the second half is more objective awareness if you break this into the wheel. So in the first quarter in particular, though, I think there's quite a bit of subjectivity, right? I'm trying to see like, how is this working out? And are you liking me? And is this working? And that sort of level, which is absolutely necessary, just like it is with any kind of Leo energy, right? You got to kind of be the center of your own solar system. But then at the same time, the awareness of what's coming from outside can be there. So, yeah.
I really like your keyword here, testing, and particularly if we're around that 90 degrees where we're squared here. So we are building that tension. Let's see what happens. And again, if it's skilled or unskilled, that's to be found out. But I love your explanations. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is where the growth is at with that energy, with any square, right? I mean, it's dynamic. So it's not going to just sit there. It's something's going to happen. And it almost kind of doesn't matter what the thing is. It's how you respond to, to what's there. But then that takes us to gibbous, right? And gibbous is now like, that big blob of a moon before it's like all the way, that's how it always looks to me, before it's all the way full. And the key words oftentimes I use here are overcoming an adjustment. It has that natural Virgo feel to it. It's like the dress rehearsal, right? It's the last time sort of we're going to be able to do. And again, this is not to say that you can't make adjustments to things in the second half of the cycle. You absolutely can. My favorite example with clients to say, as I use like art as an example, I say, let's pretend that you're going to make a painting. And during the first half of the cycle, I mean, at the beginning, you don't even know what medium you're going to use. Maybe it's going to be charcoal and not paint to begin with, right? So you don't even have that part together. By gibbous, if let's say it's going to be acrylics, right? And you're doing the final touches, by the time you hit full, that painting's, it's the gallery doors open and people are looking at it. But the second half of the phase, you may take, that maybe it gets in a museum. Maybe you write a book about your painting. Maybe you look at it one day and say, I thought it was a flower and I realized it's a face. Maybe you've been hanging it this way. And then I always say, and maybe you it's been upside down for 20 years, and you turn it around and you're like, here it is. So it's not that you're not doing something with it, but there is a lot of importance. I always look, especially when people are in progressed moon gibbous, I say, oh, pay attention here to all those tweaks and adjustments you can make, because pretty soon something's going to be out there and you won't be able to remake it the way you can in the waxing half of the cycle. Yeah.
That's wonderful advice.
Aswin, you live this one. So what do you want to, what's your...
Yeah. I mean, you spoke about adjustment, but I think it's been the theme of my life, because especially as an astrologer, I mean, I don't have many Indian friends who are astrologers. So all my astrology friends are from the Western world. So I always have to adjust to tropical zodiac. And and that's a major adjustment. But I love, I mean, for me, it's like wearing a different lens and looking at the world. So I follow most of the people whom I follow actually talk about the tropical placements. So, and it's a very different window and a very different perspective for me than what I have. But still, it's beautiful to kind of see how both the worlds align. So I think that is one of those things. And improvement again. So I started. I mean, I'm just going to talk about my personal experience so that it's even better. So I started studying astrology. I mean, I grew up hearing astrology, but I really took it seriously in 2011. And then I started studying it. And very soon I started looking at the charts. But then every time I look at a chart, I would have some kind of a learning, especially from my family members. And then when I was exposed to Western astrology because of social media primarily, I came to, before that, I didn't know there was astrology in West. So after that, I came to know that there is a very, very different astrology that is going on. So I don't know much. And then I started studying some texts because of exposures we have. Our age is the age of information. And every time I get into touch with an astrologer, it would kind of, it's a tap on my head that I have to sit down. Like few of those astrologers, I can name them, but still, those are all really important people in my life who turned the trajectory of my life. And Tara is one of those people. Without that, there is no book and there is no learning. And the book has led to so many other things. So including what we are doing now. So this constant self-improvement and kind of self-reflection, and there is no culmination for me, as you know, like I'm just falling in front of culmination. So there is no culmination. I have to kind of be satisfied with what I have. So I keep trying to improve. But the reality is I don't know if I'll actually culminate. Maybe secondary progressed phases have already culminated. But it's a good thing, like where I get to wear this Capricorn hat, although I'm a Sagittarius. So
yes, because you're Capricorn in sidereal, right? Yeah.
No, secondary progressed.
Oh.
So yeah, the progressed. I'm just talking about tropical zodiac. So I have Sun in Sagittarius, but my progressed Sun is in Capricorn. So although I'm a Sagittarius, I wear this Capricorn Sun, and with respect to that, my moon keeps moving and my perspective keeps changing. So although I have this gibbous, which is the foundation, and where I always kind of look up to something new, I don't settle for one thing. So I always move from one thing to another, although I have a fixed moon. I have Sun in Sagittarius after all. So I keep moving from one thing to another, but I never get satisfied. So I just want to keep I would
Aswin,
call it
I
as
love
like,
I love your explanations, and I can relate so much to what you're saying in terms of going back to your point of reading, improving, perfecting, fine tuning that you've got here. I'm with you in that. We're not maybe quite culminating, but that need to bounce from one idea to another. It's like, how much more information can I take in? How can I improve that, refine that, work with it? That's why I have the show with so many different astrologers, just to have so many different perspectives, and then to fine tune my own work. And what's interesting here, and if we're tying it into affinity with maybe the Virgo energy, I'm very quite self-critical. I feel like even though as much as I research or I read and go through, I have that sense, that inner critic, or I'm not quite there yet. Do you know that kind of sense? So I love how you're describing it, Aswin, because I can relate so
I
much
always have
to
that.
a lot of what you're
I don't
saying.
know if I'm improving, but I always have that. But I'm not a very, very big self-critic, but I always feel a little, that I don't know much.
You're very humble. And you're really brilliant. So but I've never ever had an experience with you, even when you're talking about developing techniques and tools. Like I always say, you're the technical one, right? I'm kind of a little more like the psychological one or whatever. But yeah, and I think that fits with that Virgo energy as well, with that gibbous, right? It is knowing you don't know everything, which none of us do. But coming from that place, there's actually room to know more, right? That's the gift in that. So
yeah, I think that's gibbous. That's very good.
Yeah.
Thanks to gibbous.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So then now we're at fulfillment when we hit full phase, right? Which means now it's the beginning of the waning. So not only is it a new phase, but it's shifting kind of the whole second half of the big cycle here. And we talked a lot about this actually at the beginning around it being a sense of completion or fruition, but we have to remember that it's only halfway through the cycle. So it doesn't mean the cycle's ending. And you can see we've got up here culmination or the inability to go on, because like we were saying, it may not be the product. I mean, let's just say it's a manufacturing thing. What if the product didn't come out well? We're not going to sell it. Okay, right? Back to the drawing board.
I think my progressed moon phase is so important. And just to share my story, in being a graduate at Kepler, this was during my full moon phase, progressed moon phase. So it was the culmination. It was the achievement of studying and getting that qualification, you could say. Now I'm in the disseminating part, in sharing the knowledge and the wisdom. And I find I'm quite a good gateway astrologer in terms of the students that we have. I do labs where we just look at natal charts and they delineate and bring those people in. So to kind of share what I've learned through that fulfillment, now disseminating to try and help others on their journey as well. So these moon phases, progressed moon phases, are so important, and so much information you can glean from them.
I agree. You and I are in the same, like I'm in disseminating, which means you and I must be like and it's very interesting. When I was first in the full progressed full phase, I don't think I fully realized it. I remember one of my teachers at the time, and this was actually when I was really starting to really get my astrology practice properly going, right? But I remember my teacher saying, "Do you recognize you're in a progressed full phase?" He said, "It's like you keep going back to a college you already graduated from." and so this is a good thing if you hit full, that is a good thing to pay attention to. Sometimes we don't realize we've made it past gibbous, right? It's like we keep on, oh, I'm not ready. And so sometimes that consciousness, which is so great thing about astrology sessions, right, or readings, you can be like, oh, I actually am here. And to your point, then it comes out. So I love that.
I love that. Wonderful.
Yeah. And then so we can just talk about disseminating. I like the words demonstration and contribution.
Sure, 100%.
Has a very Capricorn flavor. I think this really is about taking the wisdom, especially wisdom of experience. I mean, it can be other types as well, but I feel like it always has that energy to it. And I think too, another thing my teacher, Lauren Albandian, would say about this phase is she would say, be careful you're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. She would say that, and it always stuck with me, right? Because Capricorn and that disseminating, sometimes so we're trying to work kind of within the system, right? That's one of the gifts of that energy, which is great because we can progress things, but from the inside, which is a little bit different to the Aquarian energy that comes next, which is more about how do we kind of get out of where we are, although I think there's overlap between the two. But sometimes, we think just because we're restructuring or moving that somehow we've changed the whole thing. And then sometimes that's not the case. And that's, kind of where the Titanic thing comes in there, because there is, and it's funny, Cal, I don't know, I wonder how you feel about this as I'm saying this and thinking it to myself, since we're in this progress phase, reaching a maximum growth point and recognizing it, and then really thinking about what, even though you're not there yet, what's going to come next. And
I love that point. And then I would agree, yeah, what is coming next? Where's the next step? But focusing on what the moon phases are and working with that. I was going to ask a question, just going off topic. Has Laura written all those down? Those are brilliant statements.
She refuses to write anything. As students, so 2010 was when I first really anchored down. So Aswin and I are close to the same time as like, okay, I'm really going to do it. And I took a 3-year program with her every single Wednesday in person, sitting on a couch in the living room, which doesn't happen these days anymore. And we would all bug her to write, and she would just say, "Don't ever ask me again. I am not writing a book." So
to remember all what she said.
I would try. I have a binder full of handwritten notes.
Brilliant.
Aswin, anything else you think about with disseminating? Like I do have a note here that conditioned responses break down, which makes sense with the Capricorn. Sometimes you do realize, like, is the operation I'm running, like, does it still work the way I'm running it? Because again, this idea, it's just a Capricorn, right? You reach a pinnacle, right? And
Right.
at a pinnacle, there's not, you can't go further in that direction. And what does that mean?
I think it's yeah, I think I resonated with everything that you mentioned. And I also think the keyword of demonstration and contribution is really important. So again, if we talk from an astrological perspective, it's like an astrologer who has kind of read for 30 years or studied for 30 years and is deciding to write books. It's like Demetra George, who started studying the Hellenistic traditions of astrology when the Project Hindsight began. And after 30 years, or I don't know, yeah, almost after 30 years, she published 2 books, Ancient Astrology Volume 1 and Volume 2. So that's kind of very, very descriptive of the disseminating energy. And now she's kind of going on teaching everywhere, like whatever she has learned over the course of 20, 30 years, which is a really, and that again is a 30-year cycle, which kind of brings this Saturnian energy as well. The Saturn is society, so the need to contribute to the society, and it also kind of, so imagine she started at a particular moon phase by transit, and if you calculate progressions from that, the moon would have come back to the same place when she started publishing the book.
Yes.
So I think that's very, very descriptive of dissemination.
Well, it really does. And we've sort of gone all over with moon phases here. I know progress moon phases is supposed to be our intention.
It's going to be a long episode, but I love it.
We're taking the moon route for sure. But the thing is, like, I almost never see a client these days without looking where the progressed moon is, because knowing where you are in that 30-year cycle of living, like that 30-year cycle is a big cycle of living your purpose. And most people that are coming for an astrology session, they want to know where they're at. And I can't tell you how many times somebody will be right on the precipice of about to start a whole new one or wrapping one up or about to hit full. And just the consciousness of that can really change your orientation in your life. Like, it's super empowering. And we have an example when we get through here of Stevie Wonder, which is super awesome, that I think is helpful too. But now we're at last quarter. So we're at the point where I was talking about, here's where we bring it home. And this has an Aquarian vibe or flavor to it. Reorientation and awakening was words we often use here. And I think, this really, where first quarter, we might say a crisis in action, this is now a crisis in consciousness. So it is more of like, oh, I sometimes, like, think about this too, in 30 years, right? You reach this point, so 20 some years have gone by or whatever, and all of a sudden you may be like, oh, I suddenly get it, right? Or I never realized this, and that, I mean, that's a game changer as far as where you are in your own perception of things. So there's this huge potential for insight, right? For innovation, all the Aquarian type things that we think about. But we can also look at it as this, like, last effort for this final outcome, right? What are we going to do with this, everything that was born and became full and is moving through this cycle? And usually, whether it's conscious or not, we have a feel of that. What's the, like, because there's still a big last burst here. I'm not saying in balsamic, like you can still do stuff, but it's balsamic, it's more liminal space to me. It's all more getting ready to transition. There's wisdom there, but last quarter you can still have, it's like the end of a game, right? A sports thing, right? You can get the last goal. That's how it feels to me anyway.
I love that.
The Gandalf says the deep breath before the plunge. So
and the knowing that you're not going to have, so that's the difference between the waxing part. Well, you know, there's going to be more chances or whatever, that there's a different feeling in this phase. I'm not going to have more time.
Yeah, again, it says it's very descriptive of the next dialogue that comes. Knowing that we are at the brink of a battle and can't escape is even worse. So, like knowing that balsamic moon is coming, but we cannot jump over it is.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah, what's the, and then so this idea too of accepting responsibility. You know, there's that kind of social dynamic with Aquarius of really accepting, okay, here are the things I've done, or here's where things are ending up, or here's what the results have been. And then even if it's not what I've wanted, and even if I've totally misstepped, if you want to even call it that, that's more of a philosophical conversation. But then how can you make use of that? Right? I can't tell you how many times just self-exposing, well, here's what I thought and here's where it ended up. That in itself is useful, right? That in itself is a doorway to helping people understand and helping us understand. So again, it's not really attachment to how good or bad something was. It's more of what can I do with what's here now.
I love that statement. Absolutely.
And then so we get to balsamic, which is, you know, some people call this, you know, the dying moon or the waning crescent moon. And really, you know, this is where it's that whole 30-year cycle. If you think about the progress moon cycle, it's totally drawing to a close. Now, in this 30-year cycle, each phase is 3.75 years. So, you know, we have some time with them, but even on the entrance to balsamic, there's a slowing down. You know, I think things get more mystical. I think sometimes we're more psychically aware, right? Even than we are at other times. Like it's almost like you can almost see into the next thing, but you're not there yet. And you don't really relate with where you are, you know, so this is why it's that between sort of feel.
Absolutely.
But I love how Dane Ruger talks about this phase and how meaningful closure is important. And he actually says that if you can't bring meaningful closure to something, because sometimes we're not emotionally or whatever on level, we're not capable of doing that at that point. Sometimes another person isn't available and it's a conversation, right? We can't have it. So he says, if we can't bring meaningful closure, he uses the word repudiate. We repudiate the past, not because we're ignoring it, but because we know it'll come back when we're ready for it. And for now, we need to let it go until that recycles so that we can plant, really truly like nourish the ground that's going to plant the new seed. So I always encourage people in balsamic, man, if you were pregnant, what would you want to eat? What would you listen to? What would you do to, you know, really nourish? You know, I'm not trying just to be literal here, but we all know what I mean when I say this. What would you do to make sure that that next new phase is going to have the best chance? In other words, would you put a bunch, or imagine it's the garden, right? What would you put in the compost pile? A bunch of trash, you know, or, you know, that type of energy. So there's a lot of cleansing, purging. I think that's really
absolutely love your explanations of this and that element of releasing and not bringing the baggage with you into the next cycle. So I love these explanations. Absolutely brilliant.
Brilliant.
And it's Pisces, of course, which is Pisces, you know, accepting, allowing, letting go, surrendering, being open to a bigger truth, right? That even though, yes, all the things of this phase seemed important, but in a bigger phase, they're not that important, you know, and like kind of having that perspective. Yeah. So we actually like totally jumped in, talked about some of this. This gives just some specifics things here. So on the progressions between the sun and the moon, progress moon phases. So again, there is, if you think about this, secondary progressions, they move the natal chart one day for each year of life. That's just technically how this works. And so 30 days after the date of your birth, right, that equals 30 years old in life when we're looking at it this way. And so because the sun moves 1 degree a day, by progression, it moves 1 degree per year. And it takes 30 years, is what we just mentioned, to move 30 degrees or through one full sign. So this is like we get a lot of time to work with the energy when it comes to progressions. Mm-hmm. And again, you know, it's a big 30-year cycle. And I always, sometimes with a client, I'll re-say it 3 times. Now, remember, this is one big 30-year cycle of how you're living your purpose. And I usually remind them that they're in lots of other cycles too, so they don't just totally hone in on that and think it's the only thing happening in their world.
I know we're talking about the moon today, but paying attention to those progressed suns, particularly if it's switching over into a new sign. I can't wait for cardinal fire. I can't wait to get into Aries in the next few years. I'm like, give me some fire. I love Pisces energy, but let me have a bit of fire, please.
Mine's been in Virgo forever. So
is that right? Okay. Give me some air.
I know. I'll be like, yeah, it wasn't that long ago that I think it was my progressed Mercury finally moved into Libra, and I want the rest of it. I'm just like,
come with me.
I know. But again, there was a reason with that technique is the more time you have with something, the more you can really develop and get into it. So, that's kind of one of the worthwhile pieces
It's funny, I can relate to just in this past month, my progressed moon has just dipped into Libra. So I've just been out of that 2.5 years of Virgo. So I can relate.
And that's such a huge thing, because progressed moon, just, forget the phase, but progressed moon by sign and by house where it's at, that gives you a feel of sort of kind of where you are at the, like kind of at the heart of where you are. It's interesting. Mine just some months back moved into Gemini and then to the 3rd house. And this year I'm teaching 3 classes a week. So it's just funny how that it very literally shows up in your life.
Progressed into the 3rd, teaching all these classes in mutable air. I love that. Amazing.
Yeah. But it's just a perfect example of we didn't need astrology to tell us that, but actually looking ahead and knowing that was going to come helped me prepare a little bit.
And I think that's the key point you're making here as well, is the awareness. What astrology is such a powerful tool to give us some, light in the darkness and give us some, preparation for what's to come. So I love that statement. Absolutely.
And just some of these things in summary here that, again, progressed new and full moons, they're especially potent. Not that the other phases don't matter, but those are shifts, right? They're kind of, one is initiating the whole waxing half and one's initiating the whole waning half. And so whether it's like a new seed point or initiating a whole new cycle, or whether it's reaching kind of a culmination of the waxing half, those are things to really pay attention to. And like I was saying, just knowing if someone's in a waxing or waning part by progression, that's enough to work with. Like, you don't have to, if you can't eyeball it really easy or figure it out, usually you can figure out pretty easy, is it in the waxing or is it in the waning? And then you can talk about, hey, if it's waxing, what are you building up? What are you growing? What's that sort of pushing outward activity versus, hey, waning, more reflection, right? More releasing, more. And so it's just a different orientation to life, which I think is helpful. And if someone's just transitioning from one to the other, sometimes it helps to give them some encouragement. Oh, you're just past the waxing. You don't have to push as hard right now. Take a look at what's actually happening. Maybe step back and reflect. But if you're the opposite, hey, what are you ready to get going? Maybe don't just sit and watch or observe. Maybe it is time to step in. All right. So this is my delight. I had to I sent Cal a thank you email, because actually I am so, as an astrologer, I tend to not use people's charts and event charts as much. I truly am really kind of into much more the interior personal, type of astrology, but this, and I choose my examples usually by intuition, like someone that I like or I'm interested in, let's take a look. But when I pulled up Stevie Wonder for this, I was like, okay, so let's, do a little rundown of things that are happening for Stevie Wonder. And this chart here, you can see that it's a progressed first quarter moon. So I don't know if you guys can all see this, right? Progressed sun is here. And then you can see the progressed moon is here. So if we were to draw a line through that, that's, 90 degrees. We can see approximately right there. And this at the time, so Stevie Wonder was born May 13th, 1950. And this progressed chart we're looking at May 17th, 1961. So we're talking about just after he turned 11. And that's when his whole singing career began. And remember how we just talked about how first quarter is take the show on the road, right? Putting yourself out there. And in fact, Motown signed him in 1961. Again, he turned 11 right at this time. And that Motown producer named him Little Stevie Wonder. So that's how the name came at the time. And then he released his debut album in 1962. So this first quarter phase for him is May 16th, 1961 until October 25th, 1964. But I thought it was a perfect example of like, you know, that Leo's out on the stage energy.
What a brilliant example you brought up. And I was so excited, excuse me, as I was looking through this. So there's progressed light in Mercury ruled signs.
Yes, you're right. Yes.
That moon going through the 11th, you hone in the craft here, mutable Earth, and being pushed out there into, what did you say, 11 years old? Is that what?
Yes, 11 years old. And
incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. So when I looked at this, I was like, wow, what a brilliant example.
Yes. And this is a separate thing here, but you can see too, like, look where like progressed Mercury here is retrograde, and it's sitting, you know, it's like just now gone back past the sun and Mercury here in the natal chart. So there's a lot of things going on, but to me, just the phase itself is enough for a doorway. So then let's now look at last quarter moon for Stevie Wonder here. So now, and then this one, we're looking at September 28th, 1976. And so you can see here, we've got progressed sun here, Gemini, and then we've got, you can see progressed moon Aries, right? So it's coming back around. Again, we're still looking at a 90-degree, but we're looking at it from the other way around. And this, so Songs in the Key of Life, which arguably is one of the greatest albums of all time, it was released on September 28th, 1976. So this is the date I have up here, right while he's in this last quarter. So this gets me back to my first quarter, get things out there, and last quarter, bring them home, right? There's a feeling, I'm telling you, like, this is like, I'm like, okay, like it makes sense. And this album was recorded 1974 to 1976. And this last quarter phase for Stevie Wonder was December 17th, 1974 to January 15th, 1979. So that's the whole period here. It was called his magnum opus. It was number 4 in Rolling Stone's greatest 500 albums. And this album, it's funny, when I was creating these slides, so what I do when it's music, I play it. So if I'm like working on astrology, like that's like, my partner will be like, oh, here we go again, whatever, right? Because it'll be something. But like, in fact, in the course we're doing for Kepler, I have John Lennon and I think we have Miles Davis, right? And all of them have these progressed phases that align so perfectly with things. But this album in particular, super socially aware, like it head on addresses things that are going on in society, which how Aquarius last quarter is that, right? I mean, it is so fitting. And in fact, there is a song on this album, and funny, and I'm a big Stevie Wonder fan, but I don't remember this song. There's a song on this album called Saturn, which further delighted me, right? Because traditionally Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, right? And so even that is weaving here together. And this whole idea of like crisis in consciousness, well, what do we do in last quarter, right? Aquarius energy is a fixed sign. It may be intellectual and social, but it wants action. It wants to use the energy. So what does he do? He takes his talent and he puts that music out there in a way that sends a message. So yeah, I was
such
just
a brilliant
like,
example. And I think on slides before, the ones I've seen, looking at it as the last push to reach the success. And as you're saying, this is the culminate everything that he's put together. An absolutely brilliant songs that he released at this time. Amazing.
Yeah. And not that, I mean, you know, I mean, he's been doing, I mean, he's done, done stuff like forever. So it's not, these are not the only things, but the fact that this album in particular is considered to be, you know, that the magnum opus, I felt like it was such a nice alignment with it. And Aswin, back to your point, if we just looked at full phase as a culmination, we would miss this. Like this, this didn't happen at full phase. And it's interesting, you guys, when I was looking at, this may not be 100% true, but most of the examples I looked at beyond this, full phase is not necessarily where this stuff happened.
Yeah, I think
right?
it's the experience, like the maturity of music, like imagining Ennio Morricone or Howard Shore in their peak doing this. And this, you know, the last quarter moon is very, very descriptive of the finesse and also the, you know, the mental maturity of music, because music is here. As much as people think that music is here or here, but music is here. So, and you see, one of the most striking things in this chart is progressed Mercury has turned direct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, that's very, very important as well. So yeah.
And look, progressed moon is sitting right on Venus.
I was just
and-
looking at that Venus.
and
I was
the
like,
North
so
Node there.
nice.
On Venus, yeah.
Progressed sun, we've got that applying sextile to natal moon. All these different things going on. But Aswin, I love that key word you just said there of maturity and the culmination. And Tara, you were saying before about bringing in societal issues as well. So that maturity, that social consciousness, that maybe that Aquarian state, Aquarius energy, social, humanitarian quality. So all of these factors coming in together just through looking at the progressed moon phases. Absolutely. I love this example and what eloquent ways of putting that. Absolutely.
Yeah. 26-year-old man wearing a cap of 62-year-old.
Oh, yeah. That's no joke. I mean,
Can
you imagine?
It's really serious.
And when he was 11 getting started, I think he was writing all of his own stuff too. Like it was not,
Prodigy.
Sorry, I missed that last part. Sorry, what was said?
Oh, I was saying, I believe when he was 11, first getting signed, he was writing his own stuff. Like it wasn't just,
wow. Yeah,
I mean, to Ashwin's point, I mean, talk about what we would call an old soul.
Old soul, I love that. Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe he was kind of doing, India believes in reincarnation. So maybe he was already doing something in his previous birth and he just carried on from where he left. Who knows?
Well, evolutionary astrology believes in that too, Ashwin. So we can definitely agree on that. We can say yes, but
it's just prodigy. I mean, child prodigy.
Yeah. But then regardless, like he's run with it, you know? I mean, he's run with it. And yeah, I think that's what that's it, right? So
absolutely amazing. Well, thank you both so much. It's been such a pleasure in this episode for sharing your wisdom and your insights. And I'm sure everybody watching who's going to sign up for the classes, like what a brilliant duo you're going to have here with Tara and Aswin. Absolutely brilliant. So for everyone watching, I'm going to reiterate, if you look at the description box or the comment box underneath this video, I'll put a link to the class, which is coming up when? I'm trying to remember.
It starts April 6th.
April 4th. 6th, sorry.
April 6th, and it's on Saturdays. Yep, April 6th is the first class.
Absolutely wonderful. And it's a 5-week course?
Yes.
Correct.
And it's all, all on the moon. Yep.
Wonderful. 5-week course. And the great thing at Kepler is that even if you sign up and you can't make the live recordings, they're all going to be obviously recorded so you can watch them at your leisure as well. And I'm sure this is going to be very popular. What a fantastic explanation and one beautiful presentation. So you guys can see that. And if you guys want to find out more, I'll ask that question as well. So for those who maybe are not familiar with where to go, where to find you, Tara and Aswin, where do people need to go?
We are all over social media on Instagram, Facebook, and these days I'm kind of liking and disliking Twitter. It's a love-hate relationship.
I try not to touch Twitter X, but I am on there. My name is where you find everything. TaraAll.com is my website. I'm under my name under the different social media platforms. Ashwin, you are the AB verdict, pretty much.
Always the same everywhere, so it's not very difficult.
Wonderful. And I'll include the links to all your socials and websites underneath the video as well, so everybody watching can go check out their wonderful work. Well, again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I want to do this again on maybe if it's a different topic. I don't know, whatever you guys want to do.
I would love it. Thank you, Cal. This has been fun. We've been a good trio. I would be delighted to do it again.
Yeah, it's great.
Wonderful.
It's been lovely. Thanks.
Well, thank you everyone for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.